Hello. Good morning to everybody out there. Hope today finds you doing well. Sharks in the water. Hope you all staying warm out there. Here of late the weather has warmed up a bit. I guess we're supposed to get some rain today, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to talk about, and y'all could probably take a couple of guesses at what I'm going to talk about today. Yesterday I was on the job and helping to load a truck. And the guy I was helping, he said, "Vincent, did you hear that Jesse Jackson died this morning?" I was like, "Oh, really?" I know that was going to be a big news thing and whatever. And, I know he was a big figure, especially when I was younger, in the 80s and through the 90s and whatever. And he just kind of trailed off and whatever. But personally, I wasn't a person who cared much about Jesse Jackson, and this was even before I became a Christian. I recall when he really came to prominence in 1984. Ronald Reagan was up for re-election, and Jesse decided to throw his hat in the ring. And of course, in 1984, I was a sophomore in high school, which means I wasn't eligible to vote because at that time I was, how old was I? 84, 16 years old. I was 16 years old, probably around that age, 15, 16 years old. And I was in literature class, and the teacher decided to have a mock election in the class. And the thing I understood about Jesse Jackson, even then I didn't know anything about politics. I couldn't tell you the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. The only difference I could tell you was that I believe that Democrats were the ones who cared about black people and Republicans weren't. Republicans didn't care about black people. That's what I was told. But even then, I had a little inkling of something there, little inkling of common sense. And when Jesse Jackson threw his hat in the ring, everybody's excited. Everybody in the black community is like, "Oh man, Jesse Jackson. Yeah, I'm gonna vote for Jesse Jackson. I'm gonna vote for Jesse Jackson." I didn't know Jesse Jackson that well. I didn't know of him. I didn't care about him really. But I knew that in my class, because most of the people in my class were black. I went to a high school, Friendly Senior High School in Prince George's County, Maryland. Go Patriots. Anyway, I attended this school, from 1982 to 1986. Graduated in 86. But in 84, our teacher had this mock election in the class, and most of the people in my class were black. Now, this school at the time, I believe it was pretty much half and half. Black, white, so, but most of the kids in my class were black. And I knew how they would vote. Now me, I decided to take a stand because I was like, I knew why everybody was voting for Jesse Jackson. It's because he was black. Now me, I had enough sense to realize I'm not just going to vote for you simply because you're black. I'm not going to vote for you simply because you're black. You got to stand for something. But still, me being young and dumb, I wanted to vote for Walter Mondale. who, when I look back on it, you know, hindsight is 2020. When I look back on it, Walter Mondale had to be one of the worst candidates for president ever. But I wanted Walter Mondale. I didn't want Reagan because, you know, Reagan bad, you know, even though I couldn't tell you why I thought Reagan was bad, you know. I heard people say he was making the rich richer and the poor poorer, but how was he doing that? You know, nobody could explain that. But I wanted to vote for Walter Mondale. When the poll was taken and whatever, and the votes were counted up, I believe it was Jesse Jackson that won in the classroom. Matter of fact, one of my classmates, he said, well, I know who won the election in this classroom. And a couple of people, they were like, I can't believe you voted for Mondale. And I was like, yeah. I was like, you know, if you're going to be black, okay, I'm not going to vote for you simply because you're black. You got to stand for something. What is Jesse Jackson's interest? What is he like? You know, I didn't know anything about Jesse Jackson. I really didn't know anything about Mondale either. I didn't know anything about. I just thought Mondale would be better. But even back then, I knew I'm not going to vote for somebody simply because they share my same skin color. And that's the sentiment I carry on in today. I'm a lot smarter today than I was back then. But, you know, Jesse Jackson has this legacy that he fought for civil rights, and, you know, he was a reverend, and he gets up there, and let me tell you something. He had great oratorical skills. I'll give him that. He had great oratorical skills. But when it came to matters of the gospel, he was sorely lacking. And a lot of these civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King included, I know people still want to sing his praises. Martin Luther King, Al Sharpton, all these people, Raphael Warnock, they get up here, they preach civil rights, but they say they are gospel preachers at the same time. And then when you challenge people on it and say, well, these people were not gospel preachers. Oh, they did preach the gospel. They did. I've never seen one speech, not one speech, of Martin Luther King, Al Sharpton, or Jesse Jackson speaking on the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. I've never heard them speak on salvation through Jesus Christ. Never. Very rarely, if ever, did I even hear them even mention the name Jesus. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But their civil rights speeches seem to drown out the grace, seem to drown out the message of the grace of Jesus Christ. This is the reason why I don't support people like Jesse Jackson and everything. Now, I know he has a family, he has people who loves him, he got friends and everything, and my condolences do go out to them. But that's as far as it goes. And I got a friend named Seiko Woods on Facebook. You know, he talked about this. He said a lot of you all, we're going to see who really stands for the word based on how people react to the death of Jesse Jackson. And I say, yeah, exactly. I say, yeah, exactly. Because people are, oh, rest in peace. Oh, you know, he's got his wings and, you know, he's in the Father's arms. I'm not too sure about that. Now, I'm not a person who puts someone in heaven or hell when they die But I'm not too sure that Jesse Jackson is sitting in the loving arms of the Father. Same thing with Martin Luther King. Same thing with any of these other civil rights leaders who preach the gospel of civil rights, but not the actual gospel of the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. Jesse Jackson was more political than he was spiritual. And people will argue you down about, him being, oh, he was a reverend. I don't like that title, reverend. I'm gonna be honest with you. And the reason why I don't like the title reverend, because one time I looked up that title, I said, what exactly is a reverend? Because I never seen it in the Bible. Matter of fact, it only occurs one time in the Bible. I learned it occurs only one time in the Bible. But I looked it up in the dictionary, and reverend means one who deserves reverence. I was like, well, that don't sound right. I mean, I know you're a preacher and everything, but you don't deserve reverence. Reverence only goes to God. And that's why I don't like that title, reverend. I hear people, oh, I'm a reverend. That's a man-made title. But Jesse Jackson was not a preacher of the gospel. He was a preacher of civil rights. He was a political figure disguised as a preacher. And I know I might get all kinds of flack for this recording and for my point of view, but it is what it is. The dude never preached about the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Now, he was a little bit more palatable than the present day Al Sharpton, but they ran in the same they ran in the same camp. And I'm not a fan of these civil rights speakers. I'm really not. I understand that, equal rights for everybody, yada, yada, yada. And the thing about it, this day and age, we don't need civil rights leaders. Never really needed them. And I'll tell you why. If you just preach the gospel, if you preach the fullness of the gospel, you won't need to preach about civil rights. Because the gospel covers all of that. And I've actually heard people say, well, we need to preach the gospel, but we also need to preach civil rights. No, if you preach the gospel, you don't need to preach civil rights. If you would just preach the gospel, you don't have to preach civil rights. The Bible says, if Christ shall make you free, you will be free indeed. When Martin Luther King came up with this I Have a Dream speech, and he said a black man is still not free, he was basically talking about the only people who can make you free is your government. That's basically what it was saying, without saying it. But my freedom doesn't come from the government. It comes from Jesus Christ. It comes from the grace and the mercy of Jesus Christ, not from my government. Now, the government has a power to, hinder my rights and everything, stuff like that, but they can't take away my freedom. They can't take away my freedom. I'm free in Jesus, not because the government deems it. And see, that's why, I've taken a look at the I Have a Dream speech, and that speech is not as iconic as people make it out to be. Martin Luther King Jr. is no hero of mine. Maybe at one time he was somewhat of a hero. I really didn't like all that black history that we had, growing up. When I was in the 6th grade, And I didn't care for that black history and everything. It was like they were shoving it down our throats. Oh, you're black, you need to know about these black historical figures. I need to know about all historical figures, not just the black ones. But my mom would have us do a report on Martin Luther King Day, and like, gosh, we got to go through this again, pushing all this on us. A couple of times, my grandmother's church had a service commemorating Black History Month, and I remember one time we were getting together, and my brother, he said, "Man, I won't be going through this boring thing." He basically said out loud what I was thinking too, because at one time we wanted to watch a movie, and my mom forced us to go to this service, and I was like, I don't want to go to the service. I want to watch the movie. And my mom was like, "Oh, it's very important. It's not important. It really isn't. It's important to know your history and everything. I understand that, but it's like this black history was always shoved down our throats. Oh, you got to watch Roots and all that and everything." And I wasn't a fan of that black history. I really wasn't. I mean, I read about George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington. I read about those figures and everything, and they have a place in my heart, because I read about George Washington Carver and, oh gosh, Booker T. Washington. Oh wow. I would tell anybody, if you need to read a book, read Up From Slavery. Great book. Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Great book. And just because I'm against black history, that does not mean that I hate being black. People want to go into that gaslighting and say, "Oh, you don't like being black," as if they know you better than you know yourself. And one thing they'll call people like me as a sellout, but one of the biggest sellouts was Jesse Jackson. Back in 1977, and I knew this before Seiko Woods put it on his program yesterday. Back in 1977, Jesse Jackson spoke out against abortion. Spoke out against it. By 1984, he had changed his stance on abortion. And those of you all who know abortion and how Planned Parenthood got its start, it was started by a woman named Margaret Sanger, and she didn't like black people, among others. She believed in the perfect race, and she was a eugenicist who believed that we need to weed out all these undesirables so we could go forward as one perfect race. And one of those races of people she did not like were black people. Some black people were sterilized. We understand the Tuskegee experiment. And not long after she died, I think she died in 1966. But 7 years later, abortion became the law of the land. You can have an abortion. And the people who usually get the abortions, the people who are more apt to get the abortions are black people. So Margaret Sanger's vision is still alive and well, because to this day, the people who extinguish their pregnancies more often than anyone else are black folks. And it's strange to me that we would talk about all these injustices that were done against us because of the color of our skin, but we never talk about abortion. Why is that? Here was a lady who was clearly, she even said, we don't want the word to get out that we want to extinguish the black race. She called us human weeds. But we never focus on that. We focus on every little injustice that we can perceive or that we might twist around and make it, oh, that's injustice, but we never talk about abortion. Got a few black churches talk about it, very few, but we never talk about the evils of abortion and what abortion really meant. But Jesse Jackson, he turns his stance on abortion, and I believe because Jesse was a Democrat. And he wanted to get, the Democrats' nominations. He wanted to get that money. So he was like, okay. So there goes your black leader. These people are no leaders of mine. I see these people. They get up. They want to spout civil rights and everything. They're not leading me. And people might get upset and say, well, they're trying to look out for all of us. No, they're not. They're looking out for themselves. Because while you're sitting there scrimping and living paycheck to paycheck and getting other jobs that help make ends meet, these guys are living high off the hog. Look at how they dress. Look at where they live. Look at what they drive. And these are the very same people that get up there and talk about the evils of the rich. And they're part of the rich too. Someone please help me to make sense out of that. They want to talk to you about the evils of the rich man and we need to raise taxes on the rich and everything. And here they are living rich. And then when you put a fine tooth on it, when you really put a fine tooth comb to it, excuse me, you find out these guys, they're cheating on their taxes. They're looking for loopholes to where they can save more of their money, but they don't want you doing it. Now, you shouldn't be cheating on your taxes, but if you can find a loophole and whatever, I say, hey, exploit it. But they don't want you doing it. Why is that? You want to sit here and talk about the rich, and you're part of the rich. Sounds a little hypocritical to me, but I digress. But anyway, my condolences out to the family of Jesse Jackson. His friends, I know he's going to be missed. He's a major icon in black civil rights and whatever. And a lot of people are going to miss him, but I gotta lay it straight. The man was not a man of God. He may have been a reverend, he may have been a preacher, but he was not a man of God. So there's that, and that's all I got to say about it. So let me know what you all think. Let me know what you all think. If you put in comments to this video, make sure they're respectable. If you're disrespectful in your comments, you know what? Nah, go ahead, disrespect me. Go ahead. Give me the disrespect. Bring it on. I don't care. Bring it on. There are times I would there were times I would get rid of comments if they were disrespectful, but nah, bring it on. There might be other times I won't take the disrespect, but this time, just bring it on. But anyway, let me know what you think. Give me your thoughts. And and even though I'm allowing the disrespect and everything, still try to show some respect. Don't come up with these character assassinations and everything. And all I'm going to do is warn you about that. If you still do it, well, that's fine. But that's what I think. That's my point of view. And I'm going to stick with it until someone can convince me that my point of view is wrong. Okay, so anyway, you all take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Stay warm. This is Vincent E. Brown. I'm signing off. Until the next time, I'll see you on The Rebound.